San Diego, California, this is the Frug Life Podcast, the show that teaches you how to save, invest, and earn money. Here's the host, Mr. Frugal himself, Ricky Hershey.
Welcome to the Frug Life. Today's episode is actually a cross post from my other podcast, Ricky Rambles. So if you haven't seen Ricky Rambles yet, there is another podcast. And you might be asking me, Ricky, you hardly post to the Frug Life. Why did you start another podcast? And that's because this one tonally is different than the Frug Life, right? The Frug Life is about personal finance. Ricky Rambles is sometimes about personal finance, but not always. It also has a very different editing style. So here's an episode of that show, and let me know if you like it or you prefer this format or whatever. All right, here's the show. Welcome to Ricky Rambles, the podcast where I, Ricky, ramble about something. So here we go. Today I want to talk about rules versus principles. I was watching a YouTube video about this person, and they were basically saying that they wanted to have a no-spend year, where they don't spend money on, like, almost anything, with the exception of, like, essentials, and then they had a whole laundry list of rules, right? Like, they're allowed to eat out once a week at most, and maybe it needs to have people there or something, and they can get a drink with friends if they're going with friends, and there's just rules and rules and rules. And I'm sure for this person, having this intense set of rules for all sorts of situations is helpful for them. And if that's helpful for them, I mean, more power to them. That's great. But I wanted to talk about an alternative. I think a set of strict rules like that isn't going to work for everyone. And in fact, I feel like it really doesn't work for me. Sometimes, like, crazy rules like that you have to keep track of, I think hurt more than they help. It's just another thing to keep straight in your mind. For me personally, I don't have a set of complex rules about when I can spend money, when I can't spend money. I don't have specific rules that dictate that. Rather, for me, I have overarching principles I adhere to. The principles of being frugal. And so what are those principles? Well, the general rule of thumb is just I avoid spending money where possible. If I can get through a situation without spending money, I generally take that. And sure, I think that's not the ultimate answer all the time, right? The goal in life isn't to spend as little money as possible. At least that shouldn't be your goal. Rather, your goal should be focused probably on maximizing your utility. And utility, of course, I mean in the economic sense, meaning like enjoyment or benefit to you. So for me, if I'm faced with the opportunity of going out to eat dinner with some friends, I mean, I don't even think twice about it, right? I would go. Because it's something that would bring me joy. But actually, I guess the reality is, I'm a man in my 30s, and I don't have dinner with friends. Really, that's fairly true. That doesn't come up all that often. Only when I'm traveling, really. Perhaps that's a little bit of paradox of closeness, right? Like here in San Diego, where I am now, where I have people I grew up with, I don't see them all that often in some ways because I'm so close to them. And that traveling and coming back to San Diego gave me an excuse to see people. Or perhaps the real answer is I'm just really busy right now. But in any case, let's get back to the topic at hand, which is principles versus rules. So here is another idea on principles versus rules. I think you can violate the spirit of a rule And that's not like some kind of hot take or anything, really. It's pretty objective, right? Think of a rule that prohibits, let's say, flash photography, right? And let's say instead you just pulled out a flashlight and shined it at the object that you're not supposed to use flash photography on. Did you take a flash portrait of said object? Well, no. But did you shine light at something that they didn't want you to shine a light on? Yes. So you've technically adhered to that particular rule, right? But at the same time, you've violated the spirit of the rule. Now, with principles, I think that is difficult to do. I feel like you cannot really adhere to the letter of a principle while violating its substance. Rather, with principles, those two are too interlinked, right? The principle isn't specific enough for you to violate it in that way. Said another way, if you have a principle of being frugal, or that you're a principled frugal person, however you want to phrase that, if you do something unfrugal, right, you've violated that principle. So in my mind, that's also one way why principles are superior to rules. Rules can be adhered to in a strict sense of the word while missing the actual point. Likewise, these rules on not spending money, also prohibit or discourage a person from spending money on things that will generate them more money. Like if your laptop were to break, right? Your laptop is kind of an essential thing, and spending money on a new one might help you generate more earnings, right? In many ways, right? Not just doing online business, doing content creation like I'm doing now, but also like you kind of need a computer to apply for jobs, probably, to respond to emails. I suppose you could do that on a phone too. Actually, I'm not sure what editing a resume would look like on a phone. That seems pretty unfun to me. All right, so let's recap some of those principles that I didn't really talk about because I'm just saying be frugal. The key to being frugal is to be frugal. And the key to being frugal is to spend less money. Some ways that manifests itself is that I'm prepared. That's a good way to say it. A key to frugality is preparedness, right? So if I'm going to leave for the day, I bring a reusable water bottle with me so that when I'm thirsty, I have water instead of, buying water. That when I go to work, I have food with me. I have lunch, so I don't need to purchase food. And in fact, I keep food at work as well. So if I somehow did forget to bring food to work, I have food in my desk drawer at work. Another principle, I think, is being willing to endure suffering in the short term for long-term benefit. And another example of that is there was one point in time where I did run out of food at work. And instead of buying food, I suffered through the day and just ate when I got home. Now, I'm not saying that's for everyone, and that's kind of a weird example. But being able to endure short-term discomfort to help you achieve your long-term vision, I think is a good principle and something we all can do. Another principle of frugality is doing it yourself, with the example of like an oil change, right? I need to change the oil in one of my cars, and so I'm going to do it myself, actually with help of a family member who owns, jacks and a jack stand. I guess I got the plurals on that backwards. Jack stands and a jack. Oh, another example of doing it yourself is cooking for yourself. Buying food at a restaurant or a meal delivery service is expensive. You can just cook your own food. Just go to the grocery store, buy things, make it into something. Use your leftovers. Again, no rules here about what I can and can't do, but just overarching principles, ideas that I try to adhere to. And so what about when I'm on vacation? What do I do? Well, in some ways I wouldn't say the principles go out the window, but, depending on your circumstances, I also like to enjoy myself. I will go to a restaurant occasionally, spend money occasionally. Actually, Really not very frequently, though, because I've been working so much, I haven't had time to do that. And also, I get food at work pretty often, because if you work late enough, you're entitled to a meal. So the downside of that, though, is that I eat out. I eat, DoorDash food. Probably too often, and of course not with my own money. But at the end of the week, on the weekend, right, the last thing I want to do is go out and eat because I've had so much delivery already. I just want to make something myself. Another principle I would say is patience, which goes along with being willing to endure suffering, right? But the idea is that if you're patient, deals and opportunities will come to you. For example, I wanted to go to Chicago to see a friend. And, I was having trouble making that happen. And then coincidentally, or funny enough, a conference came up related to work that made it so I could go to Chicago. And on that weekend after the conference, I saw my friend. And so my patience somehow paid off. So that was nice. There's also contrasting principles, right? The idea of not procrastinating things, which can kind of stand in odds a little bit with patience, right? Because if that trip didn't come up, that opportunity didn't come up, I guess I wouldn't have seen my friend, which would have been kind of a bummer. And now I want to go back to Chicago again so I can see them. And I bet some other trip or opportunity won't come up, and I might just have to make it happen myself. Because there's this danger, right? I've probably spoken on this before, but this danger of just putting things off because if you keep doing that, they will just never happen. So that was a pretty meandering discussion, and probably a choppy one because I hit the pause button probably more than I intended to. It looks like I'm out of practice of rambling and just going on. Feel free to talk to me, though, should you have the desire and opportunity. Is it better to live a rules-driven life or a principle-driven life? I think you know where my hat stands in this ring, but I'm interested in hearing what you have to say as well. All right, well, thanks for indulging my ramble, and I don't remember if I have a sign-off for this show, so see you next time I feel like recording the show. All right, well, thanks for listening, I guess. You deserve some sort of an award or something. Yeah. I don't have anything, so just go away, I guess.